So thank you all for joining us. And I'd like to welcome you to the 2025 National ELICOS Market Report. This is, I believe, the 34th time English Australia has done the national report, and it's been in this format for about 30 years now. The initial reports were much more simple, and over the last 10 years in particular, they've gotten more and more in-depth and complicated. So today I'll be presenting some of the highlights from the report, and then you'll get the report coming out to you, all of those who participated, in the coming week. Before I kick off, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge that I come to you from Gadigal country, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and to any First Nations peoples who are joining us today. All right. So the National ELICOS Market Report, as I said, has been going for over 30 years now. It's the one report that explores ELICOS and all the data in significant depth, and we are able to report on some of the things that you can't get reported on anywhere else. So it's exciting to have a look at what we saw in 2024. So just to be clear, the data that we're reporting on is the full year of 2024, and we'll be reporting on a range of different metrics, which I'll show you in a second. Before I get into that, I'd like to acknowledge the Australian Government's Department of Education, which has funded this report for about 30 years. They make the report possible, and they help us pull the report together each year. And I'd also like to acknowledge the amazing work of the team at Bonnard. We've been working with Bonnard for quite a few years now. Bonnard is a global research organization specializing in international education, and they run a similar survey and report for multiple other destinations: the USA, the UK, Canada, Ireland, and so on. And one of the great advantages of working with Bonnard, as well as their amazing expertise and great analysis, is that they're able to provide with us a global perspective on the data. And we will be looking at some of the global picture for 2024 as we go through this report. So just to clarify what we will be covering in the report, that's the cover of the report right there. The report obviously will be looking at the ELICOS sector. However, it's really looking at the English language sector. A lot of those students that we'll look at today are not on a student visa. One of the great things about this report is that we can look at the students and the number of weeks they deliver, not just at student visa holders, as the government reports do, but the non-student visa holders, and we'll see how much of the market they make up. We've got a specific section on the report today that'll cover a comparison to pre-COVID. We'll look in depth at the student profile. We'll look at the states and at the regional level, look at the top source countries, and we'll be looking at the different provider types as well. So without further ado, I'll just jump straight in, and we'll start with some of the analysis. So you can see here on this first slide, the final total number of students in 2024 in the English language sector. So you can see it came down 16% from 2023, and it's also well below the 2019 number pre-COVID. That itself was slightly lower than 2018, and from memory, it's 11% down on the pre-COVID number. Now, I think when I saw this, I'm sure you're probably all having a similar reaction to me, that it's a lot higher than we expected. I think we've been coloured by the really challenging year that we've had in 2025. The first half of 2024, the numbers were reasonably solid, and they really didn't start falling away until the second half at an accelerated rate. The other thing is, as we'll see, that the different parts of the sector grew and shrunk at different times. The university sector performed, or a chunk of it performed reasonably well in the second half of 2024, but not so well in the beginning, whereas the private independent colleges were the reverse. Now, if we look at weeks, we see that the drop is stronger. So the total fall in weeks is down 22% versus 2023, which was an all-time high. But you can see that it's around 11% again, lower than in 2019. So yeah, as I said before, those weeks fell away as the year went on. The report doesn't cover a monthly intake, it's just the total number. But it was clear from other data, specifically the student visa data, that the decline was very much in the second half of the year. Now, if we move off that big picture for Australia and take a look at how Australia fared globally, we'll see some interesting different things. And I just wanted to point out, I should have said this at the beginning, if anyone does have questions, please pop them into the chat. Feel free to ask questions as we go. I'll do my best to answer as we go. Otherwise, you can wait till the end and ask questions. Hopefully there'll be some time. And I also need to flag that this session is going to look at the national picture. We will look at states as well, but this session will be followed by individual sessions for each of the states for our member colleges, where we'll go in a lot deeper, and we'll run the sessions like meetings, so that you can ask questions as we go. All right, Australia in the global context. What we can see here is the total student numbers, and we can see them across the key source, the key destination countries. And what we can see here in the first section is Australia going right up into that peak at 2023 and then dropping down. You can also see Canada, who we all know have had a rough time with the caps over there, and the English language market over there has fallen away. Again, the reports have made it sound like, or this graph looks less severe than the reports have flagged. What I would suggest is that this reflects all students, and in Canada, student permit holders are only a part of the market. Students can study for up to 6 months on a tourist visa in Canada, unlike Australia, where they can only do 12 weeks. And so they fill up the space in between, and those caps don't apply to them. Ireland is quite an interesting one. The figure for Ireland is just shy of Australia. It's 137,000 students versus our 141. So it's quite remarkable to think that tiny little Ireland, the birthplace of my mother, is performing so strongly now in terms of total student numbers. Now, we'll see that a different picture when we look at the weeks in a second, but it is a really strong performance by Ireland. Malta as well has continued to stay flat. UK down a little bit. USA down less, but again, I think our views of the USA are probably coloured from what's gone on since January this year, and this report does not include those numbers. So the dip was very much towards the end of 2024. Now, the thing to notice as you look at this slide is that only New Zealand has a higher number. Obviously, they're going off a small base, but everywhere is either down or flat in terms of total student numbers. And the question we often hear is, where are the students going? Well, they're not going to any of these countries. They are going to other countries where international education is growing, countries like Malaysia, countries like Dubai, but all of the major destination countries are all down. Now, if we move forward and have a look at the weeks, again, you see that big drop for Australia, a smaller drop for Canada. We can now see that Ireland, while it has almost the same number of students as Australia, is very significantly fewer weeks. It's about half. In fact, Australia is still in the first position, has by far the most weeks globally. Ireland is a little bit less than the UK in this regard, but the UK, where the average student study length is less than 4 weeks, it's really around those huge summer camp intakes as the European kids and others take a short study break in the UK over summer. Sometimes 2 weeks, sometimes 3 and 4. They make up a really significant part of that market. USA, which is more like Australia, the weeks are at a sort of a similar level to the student numbers, and you can see there that they were stable during 2024. The global total, as you can see, and as I was describing a second ago, we can see a really significant drop in the total weeks studied, total weeks of English studied globally, and a smaller but not insignificant drop in the total number of students traveling to study English in those top destinations. So that covers the 8 major English language teaching destinations, as you can see down the bottom of the slide. Looking at Australia's slice of that global pie, we all saw how much Australia grew in 2023, taking up more than 30%. That's obviously falling away in 2024, and I think we can all imagine what it's going to look like in 2025. All right, so taking a look at pre-pandemic comparison, we can start to see a few things. Where 2023, we saw that most of the states were well above their 2019 levels. That is no longer the case for most. And what you'll notice as you see this slide, the total is at 84% of the students of 2019 and 89% of the weeks. But the one thing to notice is the East Coast has been the part of the country that has seen the biggest drop. Queensland, the numbers there have dropped significantly versus 2019. New South Wales and Victoria fairly similar. South Australia, obviously, doing far better in comparison to where it was in 2019, and Western Australia up on 2019, although down on 2023. One of the things that is really valuable in this report, and when you read the report, you'll be able to dig into these details much more. You can see the different provider types, and it is quite dramatic, the difference in where students go and who goes, and we'll have a look at some of those details in this presentation, but you'll see much more in the report. Now, one thing I will flag is that the number of providers in each area has changed, since 2019. So where we have standalone Colleges, these are colleges who deliver only ELICOS, only English language courses. They're not doing anything else. They are at half in 2024, half of their pre-pandemic volumes. What I would flag is that there's also fewer of them. So some of the numbers that would be in here have now moved across into the VET plus ELICOS provider as more ELICOS only colleges opened up a VET offering as well. So the fact that that VET plus ELICOS is up up by 29% versus 2019 is indicative not just of those colleges doing better, but there being more of them. The others, in fact, there are fewer. There are certainly fewer higher ed based providers, and those who are still doing it have less of a focus on ELICOS, and it's used more as just a pathway into their own college rather than a standalone operation. Schools, as we've seen in general, the school sector has not yet returned to its 2019 and 2018 volumes. So that's true of all school students, and it's certainly true of those coming through into ELICOS. Universities have had a really mixed experience in 2024. Some of the regional universities in particular have been doing it much harder, and a number of the large universities have done better. Sorry, I've seen a question here. I'm not sure that one's for me. Sorry. All right. Now, if we look at the various, well, the top 10 source countries, again, we see quite a difference. So in 2024, I think this would be different now in the middle of 2025, but in 2024, the total number of English language students from China was significantly below where it was in 2019. I'd suggest that continued to increase in 2025, and we've seen that in the student visa data. And the student visa data does make up the vast majority of Chinese English language students. But in 2024, that was still well below 2019. Japanese numbers had picked right back up. The Colombian numbers were still very high by comparison to the 2019 level. And I think the rest of these are fairly unsurprising, with the exception of the numbers from Thailand, which had grown significantly in 2022 and 2023, and then dropped dramatically in 2024 as visas became problematic for them to get even in 2024. All right, so looking at the student profile and some of the details about the individual students, 10% on junior programs. Anecdotally, again, in 2025, I expect this will be higher, but in 2024, the younger learners were only just starting to come back. Commissionable versus non-commissionable. This always gets a question. So just to clarify, we're not talking just about agents, and we're not talking only about agents when we talk about commissionable. Some students who come via an agent, there's no payment, and some students who come via other mechanisms, there is a payment. But regardless, we've got 15% coming direct, and that's pretty standard with past years. Groups, again, relatively small, and that's fairly typical with past years. Regional providers on only 8% is worse. So the regions are getting, in 2024, did get fewer students coming through. All right, and now looking into the visa types. So student visa holders, 68% of the total, and this, while it looks different, just to give some clarity, in 2023, the surge was really in the student visas, and the visitor visas were coming back. The working holiday visas in 2022, those markets were really still struggling. The tourism market was still very low. Obviously, in 2020 and 2021, those numbers were very small. They were not so much tourist visa holders as often bridging visa holders. But this 68 to 32, if we go back in time, we see that it is similar to levels in the past, back in the earlier years. Now, if we look at a breakdown of those different visa types, you can see that the visitor visa numbers are growing. It's about a 10% growth. You can see that the working holiday visas types are growing. The other category is shrinking, but the real fall is all in the student visa holders. Yeah, so there's a really significant drop in student visa holders who are doing the longer programs. So that's obviously not just a bad thing for the ELICOS sector, it's a bad thing for the other sectors, because these are the students who are going on to other studies, a significant chunk of them going on to other studies. And with that number falling in 2024 and falling further in 2025, I would suggest that in 2026, we're going to see much smaller numbers onshore going on to vocational and higher education numbers, courses, I should say. Just to reflect on this, that going back in time again, this is fairly similar makeup to previous years, but I think I've got some takeaways later on. What I'll show you how it's happened over history, where it's quite remarkable. But this sort of makeup is not unusual. All right, now looking at those visa types by region again, for most of you, I think this is there's no great surprises here, but it is still interesting to see the Americas, the vast majority, more than 90% on a student visa. Asia Pacific, you can see about 25% on a visitor visa. So it's a really significant part, and it's really about 60% total on student visas. So there's a significant number on working holiday visas and other visa types as well. Europe, which is again not nearly where it was pre-COVID, unfortunately. And when we look at their makeup, you can see that less than half were on a student visa. So they are coming for shorter study, which is fairly typical of the European market, but just in much smaller numbers. Looking at where those students are studying, we can see the proportions, and clearly the largest part of the student numbers are going into colleges that are vocational education training colleges with ELICOS. Again, as I suggested earlier, to some significant degree, that's because this is the largest group of providers. There are more in this group than any other group, not just in our survey, as you can see there, but overall, the number of standalone ELICOS providers is shrinking year on year. All right. So this is looking at the students in terms of their bookings and who's coming direct versus who's coming via a paid source. Couple of standouts here. Victoria, 95% of students going into Victoria to study English language have come via a paid source. Vast majority is via an agent, whereas South Australia, followed fairly closely by New South Wales, is getting the most direct students. Universities as a provider type, a really significant number are coming directly. Some of those on group bookings via an agreement between universities, some of those on study tours, but many of them coming from an application directly to the university and the university's ELICOS centre. Standalone providers also significant chunk are direct. This is in part coming down to the fact that these standalone providers sometimes are in regional areas and attracting tourists and doing marketing quite differently. If we then look at the regions versus the city-based providers, you'll see again that point that I just made. 74% of regional students are commissioned students. So again, a much larger number who are coming directly, often following siblings and cousins and friends who went to a regional ELICOS college, loved it, told them about it, and off they come. All right. How are we going for time? Very good. All right. So having a look at the regional and state level. As I said before, the falls on the east coast to Queensland, Victoria, then New South Wales have been or were in 2024 severe. In 2025, as you will have seen from the recent market report that went out, New South Wales has certainly seen the biggest fall, coming off the highest base, but getting to the point where the three eastern states are on quite similar numbers. As I mentioned before, South Australia and Western Australia both performing much better by comparison. Obviously down versus 2023, but significantly less. And their 2022 and 2023 performances were so strong that that's still well above where they were pre-pandemic. You can also see the predominance in Victoria of students going on to university programs and hence having longer pathways, and the same in South Australia versus the other states. This chart shows those numbers and weeks over time. And again, as you can see these much stronger falls in weeks as well as in students on those eastern states. And you can see how much New South Wales grew during 2023. It was a really massive year, which has fallen away now. Now, if we look at the source makeup, the regions that go into the different states, you'll see that they're all reasonably similar. These are proportionate to that state. Western Australia with the larger proportion of European students versus New South Wales and South Australia and Victoria with the larger proportion coming from Asia Pacific. All right. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but if we look at the states and compare the breakdown on visa types, again, we can see that in 2024, the non-student visa types growing in South Australia and in WA. And this was, as I said earlier as well, the national average in 2023. We had a very high proportion of students on a student visa. All right. Now, when we look at this, and I don't have a pretty graph for this one, but you can look at the numbers this time. This one shows where they are in terms of regions within the different groups. So again, we see that the Americas, the vast majority in a city-based college, the Asia Pacific students, we've got not quite, but it's about 8.5% is in regional. The largest by proportion, certainly Europe, with about 18% studying in a regional area. But obviously the regions, as I said earlier, not performing so well. All right. And in terms of the regions, when we look at the decreases, and they are sadly all decreases, by far that biggest decrease in the drop in students from Latin America has been felt quite severely, particularly when they've got these long courses. That's really sucked the wind out of the sector. And we can see that over time, and particularly you can see the massive growth in weeks from Latin America, and this was driven largely by the growth in Colombia during 22 and 23. Just a really incredible growth post-COVID that has fallen away significantly in 2024 and much more significantly in the last 6 months. Now, this looks at the regions by provider type, and you can see this is quite stark. So when we look at the university-based providers, the vast majority of their students are coming from Asia Pacific. Very, very strong concentration there. In the other types, Asia Pacific is still quite clearly dominant, but much more so in the university-based providers. Possibly no great surprise there. And in the VET plus ELICOS, we've got by far the largest proportion of students from Latin America. Again, possibly no surprise there. All right. And so looking at the individual performance of these top 10 countries, we can see the strong improvement from China. As you may remember, 2023 and 2022 did not see China return nearly as quickly as some of the other regions. Certainly nowhere near anything like what we saw from Latin America. But it has continued to increase. That's true in 2025 as well. All right. And there we can see the largest changes in student numbers based on where they're coming from. So those growth countries in 2024, South Korea, nowhere near the top anymore, but it certainly is returning. Small numbers from Nepal, and this was largely due to some growth in Nepal for the higher education sector. Obviously, the China growth is driven largely by the higher education sector. France gets in there by the fact that not many other countries were growing in 2024. The very strong drop in Colombian students, Thai students, unfortunately, fell away far more in 2023, but they were still in decline in 2024. This slide shows, and forgive the rainbow there, but it's an interesting slide, and as is the one to follow. What we can see is the top 10 nationalities for the different provider types. And so where we're looking and seeing the difference in Asia Pacific and so on with the universities, and Latin America with the vet providers, it's quite interesting to look at the individual nationalities that make that up. So the slice of students from Asia Pacific for the standalone providers, for instance, we find China all the way down on number 5. And when we come across to the vet ELICOS providers, we don't find China at all in the top 10. In fact, for most providers, it's probably not in their top 20. So it's really quite stark, the difference between the different nationalities. Interesting to see Latin America make its way into the top 10 for university providers. But yeah, you can see a really significant difference in the makeup of the different provider types. And we see Switzerland across here at 9, with Spain certainly not anywhere else on the map. I won't pause too long on these, even though there's a lot of information to take in. You will be able to take all the time you like reviewing these when they come out. Someone's asked why such a significant drop from Colombia. Visas, quite simply. All visas. The visa grant rate for Colombia went from in 2023 from about 88%. At certain months in 2024, it was as low as 30%. So there were, very large numbers of students applying from Colombia getting refused visas, and can't get a visa, can't come, can't study. Those numbers are going to drop away fairly quickly, especially when the visa fee increases and increases. Colombia is a fairly price-sensitive market, and as anyone sensible, if you've got a 30% chance of getting what you paid for, you're not going to spend $1,600, let alone $2,000. So that's really what happened to Colombia. There were reasons for the rate of refusals. I think in 22 and 23, the how do I put this? It was relatively easy to get a visa. In 2024, it was relatively hard to get a visa. In 2025, extremely hard to get a visa. And so, they didn't want to waste their money. And so I think we'll see in 2025 that that Colombia has fallen even lower. Now, unfortunately, this table, which is a really interesting one, and I will hopefully get an updated one with 2024 in it globally. But when the report was made, the global numbers weren't complete yet, and we didn't have the top 10 nationalities globally. But what we can see is, if we're just looking at 2023 for a moment, that where it was a key nationality for Australia, it wasn't nearly as strong globally. I would suggest that the numbers for Australia in 2023 for Colombia in particular, Japan and Brazil were so strong that they are a significant reason why they're at the top here. Same was true for Colombia and Brazil in 2022, although Australia was still just growing back in 2022. The first half of 2022 was still quite small, but Australia's volumes were so large in 2023 that it really drove the global totals. There's an interesting one here globally, the Italian market and the Mexican market. Obviously, they're not coming to Australia. The Italian market, much easier to go to the UK, to Ireland, to Malta. Mexico, much easier to go to the US and to Canada. And so those numbers aren't coming through to Australia. All right, a little bit of a profile on English Australia and the membership. This shows that total students, 85% of all students in 2024 studied with an English Australia member college. 15% did not. This traditionally hovers around the 80% mark and has for quite some time. Last year it was 80%, and so I think we're seeing that the numbers are more and more concentrated at English Australian member colleges. In part, that's because the university sector is doing particularly well. In part, that's following with the trends, but also in part because some of those non-members are in segments and focusing on the Americas, for example, and so they are doing less well. The Americas saw the biggest fall, and the Americas was the biggest proportion of students at a non-English Australia college. Obviously, Sub-Saharan Africa has the larger percentage, but it's a tiny number of students. When we look at weeks, we see it's 82% versus 18. Again, that's really driven by the Americas, where 22% of weeks from the Americas were delivered by non-English Australia colleges. And unfortunately for them, if they are focused very much on the Americas, then it's going to be a struggle in 2025, as we know it will be for all of us. But with that concentration there, that's the market that's going down the most. And that's all for today. Now, while I was preparing for this, I thought I might share some interesting data. I was preparing for this and I was trying to work out when the first time the report ran. And so I was looking through a range of different files, and I found some of the old reports. And so I just wanted to do a very quick little flashback as we watch the sector struggle and we watch the sector go through such a hard time. I think it's worth having a look back at where we've come from. And so just a few numbers from 2001. In 2001, the total enrollments were 81,000. That's versus 141,000 in 2024. So the interesting ones were that Asia Pacific in 2021 accounted for 76% of the total market. So it was very much the core to the market. Europe, the enrollments for Europe in 2001 were 14,000. So if we compare that to the 11,000 in 2024, we can see that the European market really has, it continued to grow after 2001, obviously, but it really has fallen away over the last 5 to 10 years. New South Wales accounted for 45% of all enrolments in 2001, compared to, I believe it's 38 in 2004. Victoria accounted for only 14% of the market. whereas in 2004 it was 25%, 28% of the weeks. The student visas were 54% of total enrollments in 2001, only 54%. And the top two nationalities were South Korea and Japan in 2001. So it's very interesting to see how much the sector has changed over the years. And we are seeing it go through another change right now. Unfortunately, it's not a particularly positive change, and we're very aware of how much colleges are struggling. I must say I'm not looking forward to what this report is going to look like for 2025. I think we've all got a fairly good idea already of the nationality groups that are falling and growing, and the provider types that are doing it hardest. But I don't think anyone is doing as well as they would like, unfortunately. Now I'm going to stop the presentation there, and we've got about 10 minutes. If anyone has any questions, now's the time to pop them into the chat, or I don't know if you're able to unmute and speak, but if that's possible, feel free to do so. Sophie says it's not possible to unmute, so you'll have to type if you have any questions. Couple of questions that I'll preempt is that the reports will go out early next week, and so everyone who participated will receive a full copy of the report. The executive summary will be published on the English Australia website, and that's publicly available. Next week, I will also be contacting everyone to arrange an individual presentation for each of the states. One thing that I forgot to mention right at the beginning, in terms of the states, is that you'll notice that we didn't talk about Tasmania or the territories. So traditionally, when this report has been done, and we've continued that tradition this year, the Northern Territory numbers are included in Queensland, because there was in the past, was generally only one provider of ELICOS in the Northern Territory, and so it didn't seem fair to report their numbers. ACT is included in New South Wales, and Tasmania is included in Victoria. So sorry, I didn't mention that before. And when I run the state sessions, let's call them regions, we'll do the same thing. So we'll run a session for Tasmania within the Victorian group, and ACT will be included in the New South Wales group. So I see a couple of questions have come in. Any news about the student visa fee for standalone ELICOS or less than 1 year course duration? News is that the discussions are progressing. As for anyone who doesn't know, English Australia has been advocating for a separate visa fee for ELICOS since 2024, when the first increase was brought in. $1,600 is completely disproportionate to an ELICOS course. $2,000 is just silly. I put a proposal to the Assistant Minister for International Education, Julian Hill. In his first week in office, he was generous enough to meet with me and give me a solid chunk of his time, and we had a great conversation about the sector. He really showed really good awareness and understanding and concern about the ELICOS sector, and has followed up in good faith, and really energetically getting the department to start modelling and looking at the logistics of how they could separate ELICOS in terms of fee. And I have a meeting, or there is a meeting that I'll be going to for the Education Visa Consultative Committee, which is a committee of the Department of Home Affairs and the peak bodies, and I'll be attending that on the 6th. And that meeting is an ad hoc meeting purely to talk about the visa fee. So the hope at this stage is that they will present the model that they have decided upon. I know that I put in a fairly extensive submission with details of how we believe that lower fee could be charged. We weren't the only one. IEAA put in a submission. I believe some others did too. And hopefully we'll hear what they're going to propose to Cabinet. So because it's in the budget, visa fees are in the budget, it's a legal device, and so it must go through Cabinet. It must go through the budget update, which will be in late September, I believe. And hopefully that will get up and we'll see a significantly lower fee for standalone ELICOS, where they are doing a course of less than 1 year. Does Turkey fall under Middle East in the previous slides? That's a very good question. I believe it does, yes. And yes, it is a market that has been impacted severely over or through 2024. The visa grant rate did dip quite badly, and obviously students coming to do an ELICOS only course with a poor grant rate are going to struggle to part with $1,600, let alone $2,000 for a visa if they're not going to get it. Unfortunately, Colombia and Turkey contributed to the grant rate issues with lots of applications for protection visas, and that's one of the key markers that raises their evidence levels and risk concerns, and so they get more scrutiny, and that's contributed to it. Yeah, short answer is yes, the numbers were Turkey. Can you foresee government lobbying is having a positive effect? I would say that we have a unique situation in history. We have a government who's come out of an election which they went into, and if you remember back to 2024, and particularly early in 2024, there was a fairly broad perception that Labor were going to struggle in the election. They won very convincingly, but during that struggle, they were under a lot of pressure, and they responded to that pressure from the public, but also from media and from the opposition. I think now we have a situation where we've got an Assistant Minister for International Education. The government has made it clear that they do not agree with arguments that the international students are causing the housing crisis. The Prime Minister very early on made a public statement very positive about international education. We've got the Assistant Minister who is quite positive about international education and understands the ELICOS sector. He's engaged with me. I had a meeting with his office this morning. Again, a really positive one. For those of you who aren't aware, he in the first meeting he expressed an interest in visiting ELICOS colleges. And so I was able to give him a list of ELICOS colleges that he might want to visit. of different kinds in different locations so that he could drop by as he travels around the country. He's already visited the ELICOS Centre at UTAS. He visited our member down in Melbourne. They're also in Brisbane, Impact, and spent a really lovely period. And I've got some great photos which I'll be sharing soon of his visit there. And he came away from that with a really positive impression of the ELICOS sector. And so I do think that there's an awareness both that the ELICOS sector is an important and valued sector, but also that many of the changes that were brought in 2024 have impacted ELICOS in a particularly harsh way. As I say, he's been very good about getting the department to straight to work to explore the lower visa charge for ELICOS. So, you know, in summary, I would say, yes, I do think that we are in a much better position in terms of the government intent towards the sector in 2025 or this time in 2025 than we were at the same time last year. I do expect that at some point in the next few months, we'll see the government reintroduce a bill to amend the ESOS Act to bring in some of the changes that they wanted to introduce in 2024 that they didn't get through. I don't believe that will include caps, but it will include a number of measures aimed at improving integrity in the sector. As I say, I met with the Minister's office this morning to talk about those changes, and I'm hopeful that that there'll be positive changes that will support high quality providers. But look, at the same time, I'd say that there's no shying away from the fact that the sector is experiencing possibly the worst environment it's ever experienced. This is by far the biggest decline. The enrollments are numbers in ELICOS right now are back at 2013 levels. The commencements are back at 2006 levels. Visa grants and applications are lower than they were in 2025 and sorry, in 2026. So, you know, there's no shying away from the damage that has been done. And you know, we've lost great colleges from the membership, and we've seen some you know, a number of good providers step away from ELICOS. So certainly we're going through very tough times, and there's a lot of time between now and when, you know, realistically we can expect an ELICOS visa fee to you know, be lowered, unfortunately, as much as we'd like to see it happen now. Unfortunately, it's needs to go through the budget process, and there's no getting around that at this stage. I think that's the last of the questions. All right. On that note, I'll finish up the webinar. Just flagging that conference is on at the end of August, and bookings are registrations are still available. There's still spots available if you'd like to book, and if you haven't, please do that ASAP before you miss out. As I said earlier, I'll also be in contact over the next few days with the report itself, and for members with invitations to. Thank you. Sophie's just popped into the chat the website for the conference. If you want to go in and check the program out and register, that's the place to do it. Yes, as I said, I will be sending out copies of the report to participants and invitations to members in each of the states and territories to go for another session where we'll dig into each of the states and its performance. And that one, as I said, will be an open one. We'll run it as a meeting so that you can interrupt and we can ask questions and we can possibly pull some of the data apart and dig right in. I hope the session has been helpful. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.